Hello, everybody. It is the end of my work week, so that means it's time for you to join me on the Homeward Path. This is the show that I record in my vehicle on the way home from work at the end of the work week. And my name is Adam. I'm a husband, father of 3, work a full-time job, and listen, magic's tough. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and if you're like me and don't have a lot of either one of those things because other responsibilities come first, then you should probably stay tuned, because I'm here to try to show you how I am seeking improvement at Magic under difficult time and financial constraints. But before we get started, I need to remind you that I'm a part of the Constructive Criticism Network of shows. If you haven't checked out the other content on the network, it is fantastic, and you are doing yourself a disservice by not doing so. We bid a hopefully temporary farewell to the Arena Mythic cast, but Spencer returns, makes a glorious return to the flagship Constructive Criticism show. We've got Common Knowledge with Brad and Christian, and we've got Sam Black, one of the icons, one of the legends of Magic the Gathering, with his Insights Unlimited. So we've got something for everybody. Out of the group, I'm probably the most casual, and I'm kind of trying to lay into that, embrace that, lean into it a little bit more. But check out the network, and don't forget to check out our sponsors, which I'll read off at the beginning of each segment. Well, we're back, and I hope everyone's had a good week. I know we did. It was a nice weekend out, but we're back. It is currently Sunday afternoon, so we're doing this on the shortest possible turnaround. With that said, let's dive in. First segment, every episode, Budget Spotlight. And this week for Budget Spotlight, we're doing things a little bit differently because I just could not think of a mythic I wanted to highlight yet. So we're doing an uncommon and 3 rares that I feel are undervalued, either in terms of their financial implication or, more pressingly, I feel like they've got more gameplay viability than their price tags would suggest. This segment is brought to you by our sponsorship through MTGO Traders and Pure MTGO, respectively. Pure MTGO is the official sponsor of the entire network, and MTGO Traders is their sponsor, so they kind of make it all possible. If you're looking for Magic content on the web, they've got something for everybody. Go check it out. Do yourself that favor. And if you're looking for cards for Magic Online, use MTGO Traders. It's not a rental service. You just get to keep the cards. So it's kind of a win-win for you. The cards are cheaper, and you get to keep them. You can flip them for tickets down the line if the deck doesn't work out, instead of having to give the cards back. So with that out of the way, let's dive in to our uncommon. And our uncommon this week is a card several of us have seen entirely too much of, thanks to the standard 2022 format from the summer, and that is Skullport Merchant. Skullport Merchant is 2 and a black for a 1/4... I believe it's human rogue or human, no, probably not human rogue. I can't even remember what. A human peasant, something like that. Maybe a pirate. I genuinely do not remember the rest of the creature type beyond human. But you're a 3 mana, 1/4. When it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token, and then 1 and a black, sacrifice another artifact or creature. Sacrifice another creature or a treasure, draw a card. So a 1/4 is, it was then and continues to be now, a relevant size in standard, and getting you from 3 to 5 mana is a really big deal. So you can cast this on turn 3, make a treasure, hit your land drop for turn 4, and have access to 5 mana at your disposal. That's not nothing. Very important to remember that. But the other ability adds a level of grind capability that ensures that your treasure cards that you're playing in your deck maintain a level of usefulness late. First of all, anytime you can turn creatures that are about to die into cards, it's a big deal. You are shutting off opposing removal. We've talked about this before. but it's also the ability to, if you top deck this to wide open board, nothing else going on, it reads 5 mana, 1/4. When this creature enters the battlefield, draw a card. Like it's a creature on the table and it draws a fresh card. And if you draw a Prosperous Innkeeper or if you draw a Kalane, that represents another card. Every single one of these creatures, these kind of mopey, unassuming creatures, can snowball into this engine where you're just digging through your deck trying to find the haymaker you need to win the game or to stabilize. So all the way around, not a bad deal, especially for the price. The paper price, courtesy of Cool Stuff Inc., is 25 cents a copy. And the Magic Online price, courtesy of MTGO traders, is a penny. 0.01 tickets. So, if you haven't picked these up, I don't know what you're doing. Kind of a big deal. It's not the kind of card that's going to be dominant in a format, but it is the kind of card that's always going to have a niche. And for that reason, I think it's a really good value. Moving on to our first rare of the week, we're talking Treasure Map. Now, Treasure Map is kind of a near and dear thing for me, but it's a 2-mana artifact, a modal double face card. The front half is a 2-mana artifact. That's not modal double face. It's just a classic double face. You meet the conditioning, you transform it. I should specify that. For 1 and tap, you can scry 1 and then put a landmark counter on Treasure Map. Then if you have 3 or more landmark counters on it, create 3 treasures and transform it. And on the other side, it goes from Treasure Map to Treasure Cove. And Treasure Cove can either tap for a colorless mana or can tap, sacrifice a treasure, and draw a card. There have been plenty of bad mid-range decks that were made better while this card was in Standard, not that long ago. I have vivid memories playing against piles of cards, playing Karn, Scion of Urza, and this as their card draw package, and they're otherwise incapable of accessing card draw decks. And it was just wonderful for exactly that role. It's generic card draw, if nothing else. But it also still has utility still has utility as an enabler for a litany of synergies, especially with more treasure cards being printed after it. Not the least of which is anything that allows you to untap it, allows you to keep eating treasures to draw cards. You've got the synergy with cards that care about what's on top of your library, be it Delver of Secrets, be it whatever. Scrying in your upkeep in response to your Delver trigger is kind of cool. Scrying in your upkeep in response to other triggers, Clash, Kinship, whatever. All the triggers that are out there, right, that care about the top card of your library, being able to scry for 1 mana is kind of a big deal. And then once flipped, again, it makes 3 treasures and then gives you a way to turn them into actual cards. It's kind of a big deal. Think Mazemind Tome, but with less mana effort involved. Because, Mazemind Tome we talked about being the best white card draw available. This was better. Because this would turn from a 2-mana investment, and then Tome you had to activate 4 times in order for it to go away. So you get 4 activations before you would gain life and stop getting the benefit. So, on its face, Tome draws more cards, but this fixes you early and draws you cards late, whereas Tome made you choose between the two. Between the two, I kind of dig Treasure Map a lot. And price-wise, at Cool Stuff Inc., for paper, it's $7 a copy, which is obviously not stellar. But considering how cheap everything else is on this list, I thought we could get away with one that's a little bit on the high side. And it's sort of evergreen when it comes to formats like Pioneer and Commander. And then on Magic Online, it is 0.2 or 0.02 tickets. It's 2 cents. 2 pennies. We can do worse than 2 pennies for that effect on Magic Online. Our second rare, this would normally be the Mythic slot, is Florian Voldaren Scion. Now, Florian is a little bit of kind of an add-in here, because it obviously doesn't have the same kind of direct synergy with treasures that the rest of the cards we're going to talk about do. But Florian's an interesting case study in ways to branch out of the Wizards told me to build around it this way kind of mantra. Florian is 1 a black and a red, legendary creature, vampire, probably shaman. I can't remember. Let's look. Because for once we're sitting at home. So, vampire noble, maybe? Vampire noble. 1 a black and a red, legendary creature, vampire noble. 3/3, first strike. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile 1 of those cards and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. So, it's a decent example of a small ball payoff for a stray treasure token, because you chip in, and then you get to look at the top card of your deck and decide if you want to play it this turn. And if it's a 1-drop spell, well, if you've got an extra treasure laying around, you can play it. But the more treasures you have, the stronger this ability gets, because you have more mana laying around. Even disregarding that, it provides a much-needed punch of card advantage to black-red aggressive decks, which admittedly we haven't seen too many of in the current standard format, but it honestly kind of makes me think the format might be a little bit susceptible. If we can find an aggressively oriented black-red deck in the format, Florian might be enough to make it good. And while this is not a mythic, this is a card that could have a major impact going forward. Both, 1, the price tag is really low, and 2, it's potentially going to be in a format where one of its most natural predators may not be there for much longer, that being Alred's Epiphany, that may or may not get banned. It's the kind of card that rewards you for getting on the ground and getting in there, and it feels like the kind of card that is waiting for just a little bit more support. And we've got Innistrad Crimson Vow on the way, Kamigawa and Neon Dynasty in February. Like, this thing could go from 0 to hero really quick. And that is not that is a reasonable place to look, especially at the price tag of $1 in paper and 2 cents on MTGO. And last but not least, for our Commander slanted card, we have Marionette Master. Marionette Master is 4 black. Let's double check creature types, because I can't remember things. Anyway, 6 mana, buys you a 1/3, I believe it is. Let's get it pulled up, if this thing will ever listen to me. Marionette Master. 6 mana, buys you a 1/3 Human Artificer with Fabricate 3. When this creature enters the battlefield, put your choice of either 3+1/+1 counters on it, or create 3 servos. And then whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. You want a way to punish people for bad decisions with Smothering Tithe, for letting you get all the treasures? Just jam this thing. Like, jam this thing with a stack of 15 treasures and watch your opponent's faces just go, oh. 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 It even goes as far as being the centerpiece of a story, one of the really good stories from my old LGS, Goose's Computers and Games, in which we had a mirror between two blue-black control players that were playing this card as a win condition in their blue-black control decks, because we were brewers. What can we say? Marionette Master has, with the plus ability, has a lot of synergy with treasures, because treasures can sacrifice freely. So they were playing Treasure Map, and then they were playing Spell Swindle and other like blue and black cards that just left a stray treasure behind here and there. And it led to one of the funniest sequences I've ever seen, where one player jammed Marionette Master, and then we saw 3 copies of Spell Swindle before a disallow finally resolved the stack. So it was Marionette Master, Spell Swindle, your Marionette Master, Spell Swindle, your Spell Swindle, Spell Swindle, your Spell Swindle that's trying to counter my Spell Swindle. And then obviously with 3+1/+1 counters on Marionette Master, if you get 5 treasures from Spell Swindle, you will in turn have enough treasures to kill your opponent from 20 life. That was the sort of combo, and I use air quotes there, that they were trying to go for, but it was a really cool story. One of the wildest stack resolutions I've ever seen, and just a really cool moment in LGS history, if you will. But seriously, whether it's treasures or just any other artifact sacrificing loops, think Time Sieve from last week's episode. You know, if you've got a Marionette Master on the battlefield and you're executing this one of the Time Sieve loops, your opponent's dying at the same time. It just closes out games. You know, 9 times out of 10, your default mode is going to be 6 mana, 4/6. Every time I sack an artifact, somebody loses 4 life. That's what this is mostly for. But some amount of the time, it's just going to come down and, you know, make tokens and try to survive. Both these things are valid ways to play Magic. And the price tag on it is 50 cents in paper and a penny on Magic Online. So, as win conditions in Commander go, you can do a whole lot worse. So with that out of the way, that's going to wrap up Budget Spotlight and transition us to our second segment, Brew of the Week, where we are highlighting a deck that, in this case, is kind of the reason we're talking about what we're talking about this week. But it's a deck that I feel like either has some merit going forward, doesn't get played as much as I think it should, or just is really subjectively cool. I mean, there's no hard point analysis that I'm looking for here. It's just whether or not it gets my attention. This week's deck is Jund Treasures, and it's an important part to mention that this segment is brought to you by our affiliate program with Grey Viking Games. That affiliate link is down in the description if you are watching this on YouTube, listening on Constructed Criticism, or Pure MTGO. And if you're not listening on any of those parts, join our conversation in the Facebook group, Homeward Pathfinders, and it's going to be in the pinned messages there. So, Jund Treasures, core concept. Plan A is to accelerate into some of Standard's strongest threats a turn early. You've got access to Goldspan Dragon. You've got access to Esika's Chariot. You've got access to Wrenn and 7. And I know y'all are tired of hearing me talk about those 3 cards, but they're really, 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 really good. Like, they're really good. But Plan B is to grind using spot removal and a surprisingly robust draw engine if you're playing a bunch of treasures in your deck. From a customization standpoint, how consistently do you want to slam a Goldspan, a Chariot, or a Wrenn and 7 a turn early? Between Prosperous Innkeeper, Kalane, Skullport Merchant, you know, there's a number of ways to get that 1 mana ahead, to get that first good threat down. So if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, you can go all the way down it with cards like Magda and Jaspera Sentinel, and just be all the way in on casting 4 and 5 drops early at the expense of being able to interact. On the flip side, you can play a little bit more of an interactive deck and still be able to jam Innkeeper, who is a reasonable Magic card, on turn 2. You know, Innkeeper on 2, Chariot on 3, Binding on 4, Goldspan on 5 is still a reasonable curve. So, how deep into the treasure engine do you want to go? Do you play Kalane? Do you play cards like Seize the Spoils or Unexpected Windfall? Do you play additional ways to use your treasures or make more? How much learning do we want to do? And if you do want to do a bunch of learning, what's your lesson plan look like? Mine is generally pretty streamlined, and I don't do a ton of it in decks like this, especially. It's usually in the form of like 2 copies of Field Trip and like probably 2 copies of Hunt for Specimens as just kind of a hedge for when I don't draw Mana Acceleration. And that may just be a classic case of me trying too hard, but I just really like the cards. So, knowing how much learning you want to do, how much, what your lesson plan is, that's also really important. From a strengths and weaknesses standpoint, you've got a relatively high power ceiling and a capable grind game between Goldspan Dragon, Ren 7, Chariot, Planeswalkers. I mean, you've got a lot to choose from that you're just a pile of cards that each one of them can take over the game. And you've got the draw engine and the grind capability of stuff like Orcus or Skullport or, these other really kind of incremental grindy cards that you are playing alongside these single, like, snowballing engine cards in your deck. But being able to play all those cards doesn't mean you're going to consistently play all those cards, thanks to the biggest weakness, which is mana. We don't have things like Triomes or Shocklands or Fabled Passage in the format anymore. So we kind of have to improvise pretty heavily and lean really hard on the treasures to fix our mana. And depending on whether or not you get a Goldspan down and get going, you may not be able to. So your treasures will be stressed rather frequently the further down the just play good cards route you go. And of course, the fewer really good cards you play, the harder it is to just hit those high impact top decks and dominate the game. So it's a really delicate balancing act to get it right. And I'm not going to pretend that I have. From an outlook perspective, when you play a pile of good Magic cards, you get a great feeling of being able to come back from nearly any given situation. Board's relatively stable. You're kind of sitting there looking at each other and you just top deck a Goldspan and go at it. That feels pretty strong. You top deck a Renin 7 with a Chariot on the board, but your opponent's killed all your other creatures. That feels really strong. You top deck Skullport Merchant in the middle of the game. And you're not super excited, but at least I'm getting at least one more card out of this. And if my opponent trades a removal spell for it, even better. Because then it's a 2-for-1. The most important facet of this deck is balancing its mana. Because it's really important to have a clear vision in determining what your color balance. It's really a deck that is either green-red splashing black for Skullport, Deadly Dispute, and Binding, or it's green-black splashing Goldspan and nothing else in red. at least in my experience. It's got to be one of those two models. If you're base black, you really want to lean toward the one where you only need red mana for Goldspan. If you're base green, you can kind of cheat a little bit more and get away with being more green-red and having the black be your light splash. But it's really important to have a clear picture of like what you want your curve to look like, you know, how you interact with the format, how you're going to sideboard, all those things that we've talked about on this show several times over. It's really important with a deck like this that is very much a right 75, right weekend kind of deck. So that's going to wrap up Brew of the Week. Let's move on to the main topic, which I dubbed Treasury Department, because sometimes I lack imagination. Main segment is made possible by contributions from Patreon. Patreon.com/HomeworkPathMTG is where you can get involved in that. This show is always going to be free, but if you like what we're doing enough to help us keep doing it, head over there, become a patron, take advantage of your rewards. So, treasures have gradually become a big part of Magic. Just kind of out of nowhere, it feels like. They officially became a thing in Ixalan, with a few similar but not the same name tokens appearing throughout the years before. You know, we have the gold tokens that did the same thing. We had the Ethereum cells from Tezzeret, whichever one it was that was in Aether Revolt, the 4-drop one. Whatever the case may be, there's a precedent for these non-creature artifact tokens that tap and sacrifice to make mana. They provided you a temporary boost in mana and fixing. And since their initial introduction, they've expanded to serve a number of roles in deck building. We've seen a lot of cards printed for them. Some of them just kind of offhandedly in other sets, but most recently in Strixhaven and Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, we got a whole bunch of treasure cards, just kind of all at once, and I'm here for it. But it's important to kind of unpack why these cards are good, what they bring to the table, and what they do with the mechanic they've helped create, because I think it's a really cool mechanic. So for starters, role number 1 is the most obvious one, mana fixing and ramp. Obviously, a non-token permanent you can stockpile, which taps for mana as a one-shot reward. Gives you a great way to access off-color fixing and bigger spells early. You kind of hurdle yourself toward the fundamental turn and or clean up some patches where you're having to fit in a tap land or you miss a land drop. You know, if one thing treasures do that I love a lot is reduces a lot of the mana variance available in the game, where you can make difficult decisions about whether or not you want to cast your spells on time based on how many treasures you have. Do you want to cast something early and not be able to cast your next spell on time, or do you want to cast something that's regularly on curve in order to hit something potentially more powerful down the line early? In conjunction with a little bit of synergy, these cards can become powerful. In conjunction with some synergy cards, you can become really powerful with few spare treasures laying around. Think Urza, think Galazeth Prismari, which allows you to tap treasures for mana without sacrificing them, as long as you're spending them on instants and sorceries. You can think Goldspan Dragon, that allows them to sacrifice for 2 mana instead of 1, giving you access to both more and more powerful spells early. And as outlined in a recent episode, they also help enable off-color splashes, which allows treasure decks to access a wide swath of powerful answers to the field. Think off-color lessons. Think splashing Test of Talents after sideboard against Epiphany decks. You know, it's relatively unexplored territory, which is kind of a funny thing, considering Ixalan had explore and unclaimed territory both in the set. Tangents. Role number 2 is kind of the most recent one, but we've talked about kind of the 2 main cards that give you major benefits for it. But it goes deeper than that. Card advantage would be role number 2. Cards like Treasure Map and Skullport Merchant allow you to directly convert treasures to cards at a clearly defined rate. Skullport Merchant trades 2 mana and 1 treasure for a card, while a flipped Treasure Map transforms just a treasure directly for a card once a turn. But there's more to it than that. Cards like Deadly Dispute, Costly Plunder, things that allow you to sacrifice permanents to draw cards. A really good example going way, way back. Perilous Research. 2 mana. Draw 2 cards, sacrifice permanent. That's pretty good alongside treasure tokens. It was really good alongside Hatching Plans, which is why we played it initially, because you could sacrifice if Hatching Plans went to the graveyard, you would draw 3 cards. So an end step Perilous Research would sacrifice Hatching Plans and draw 5. But in conjunction with treasures, it allows you to have more of a fail state, if you will. Deadly Dispute, Costly Plunder are direct synergy pieces. Deadly Dispute lets you trade 2 mana and a treasure for 2 cards and another treasure. So you're functionally just trading 2 mana and Deadly Dispute for 2 more cards because you break even on treasures, which is kind of a big deal. Costly Plunder is just 2 mana, sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw 2 cards. But all of that, the fact that these cards are relatively non-discriminatory in what you use to power them, makes them that much more powerful in conjunction with a little bit of synergy, which is where role number 3 comes in. You have obvious build-arounds in the mana from a treasure payoffs from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. Devour Intellect comes to mind. It goes from being a really, really bad discard spell to a painless Thoughtseize. The 2-drop Grizzly Bear that draws a card and you lose a life when it enters the battlefield. If you spent mana from a treasure to cast it, is really strong. Kalane makes your creatures more efficient by spending mana from treasures to cast them. All the way around, it's just a really compelling mechanic. But it goes deeper than that, because you also have cards that care when artifacts enter the battlefield, or cards that care how many artifacts you control, or cards that care about artifacts dying, tapping untapped artifacts you control. Treasures help you with all of those. Unexpected Windfall, leaving behind 2 treasures, means you can then tap those 2 treasures, use Clock of Omens to untap something that makes a lot of mana. Or, obviously Urza. No, not Grand Architect. There's a number of them. You can access off-color mana for cards for mechanics like Sunburst or Converge. Your engineered explosives get better. Your Bring to Light can cast for 5 colors earlier with a treasure. You've got synergy with when you sacrifice a permanent. Think Mayhem Devil plus treasures is kind of gross. Because you sacrifice a bunch of treasures, float a bunch of mana, Mayhem Devil pings a bunch of stuff, and then you've still got mana floating, so you can do stuff like Trail of Crumbs, sacrifice a food, ping another thing, and draw a card. Or, just get you the last few points of damage. Put a bunch of counters on your Corvold to kill your opponent. Whatever. You've got Tokens Matter synergy, not just in the form of cards like Parallel Lives, Anointed Procession, or Doubling Season that will double the number of treasure tokens you get, but in the form of cards like, what is that card's name? Woodland Champion, I think. I can't remember the card's name. It's 1 and a green, 1/1, and whenever a token enters under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Treasures or tokens, they put a counter on it. And then can help defend it. And there's a lot more. I know there's more to it than that. And there's more that's on the way, because this is a really sweet mechanic, and I don't think it's something Wizards intended to just be pocketed into this format. I think this is one of the ways you help with mana fixing and mana ramp going forward without having to shuffle a ton, is to really lean into treasures. And that leads into our final notes. Treasures began life as a pretty simple mechanic, but have a lot to offer and a lot more utility than their original design. They went from being, yeah, you can jump ahead in mana for one shot. It's like a delayed ritual. You pick when the ritual fires off. To this like all-encompassing engine where you get to do a whole bunch of cool stuff all at once. And I'd really, really like to see this theme continue to be expanded upon because I think it's just neat. It's just cool. You know, it's similar in a lot of ways to some other mechanics from other games in which, I mean, you know, Hearthstone gives you the coin. You have cards that make the coin. And it's really similar to the coin, except any deck can use the same spells. You know, Ragavan is a classic example of treasures providing a massive benefit to a card that honestly probably didn't need it. But it's a clear example of like tacking an extra treasure on being just that little bit extra. This is really good. So the more we continue to see them expand and play around with this design space and creating and using treasures, the more I think the game is going to evolve in an interesting direction because they simultaneously lower and increase variance based on how you play them. And if I've ever been consistent about anything and what I love in Magic, it's making decisions. I want to be given the power to make decisions by the game mechanics at my disposal. I like modal spells. I like double face cards. I like, you know, the dual lands. I like that my decisions have a direct result in shaping the outcome of the games that I play in a very clear and tangible way. And to me, treasures are a classic example of that. So I really hope we get more of this in the future. But that's all I got for this week, everybody. I'm sorry for this short episode, but I mean, treasures don't stick around for long, right? But if you've got any questions, you've got comments, you've got concerns, you can send them to me on Twitter at Homeward Path MTG. You can join the conversation in our Facebook group, the Homeward Pathfinders. If you want to become a patron of the show, don't forget patreon.com/HomewardPathMTG. And I will leave you as I do every episode. First of all, update on the Race to Mythic. I'm sitting in Gold 3, kind of trading wins and losses, trying to figure out what everybody's playing there. Seems like an awful lot of mono white. Just an unfortunate amount of mono white. So I am pivoting, I think, to Blue-Red Epiphany to try to fight my way through Gold. I've been playing just more kind of brews and cool decks, but I think I'm just going to play the good stuff for a little bit. We're just going to play good cards and hope for the best. But Amaris has fallen rather deep head over heels into the Animal Crossing community and has decided to work more on the Mythic Challenge next month. So my plan is to try to get as high as I can this month and then look for a better, just kind of gradually try to go up a little bit higher every month until we get there. Amaris, I guess, wants to make it all happen in one shot. We'll see which one of us gets there first, eh? But with that in mind, that's all I got for this episode. Again, questions, comments, concerns, Twitter, Homeward Path MTG, Facebook group, Homeward Pathfinders. If you want to become a patron, support the show in a direct fashion, patreon.com/HomewardPathMTG. Don't forget to check out our sponsors. Don't forget to check out the rest of the network. ConstructiveCriticism.com. Everybody's doing good stuff right now. The noises you're hearing in the background are my children. So, that's all I've got. So, I will leave you as I do every episode with a few parting words. Everybody's going through stuff right now. Things are not great. We don't know what people have got going on. So with that in mind, I always urge people to lead with kindness when they're dealing with other people. Always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind. So laugh hard, treasure your memories playing Magic with new people, and be kind. We'll catch you next episode.